Needless to say, I am definitely due for some upgrades. So yes, today's video will be tested out with an old NUC that's only running a 10th gen Intel CPU. But that doesn't mean it has to be dirty. You dirty girl. This is a Simply NUC Plex media server. Comes with Windows 10 Home, and it has a built-in TV tuner. Now this is nothing new, I've already tested this out, but in today's video, I sort of accidentally really stress test it. And that's because I wanted to experiment with running a backup media server, and I wanted to use a small low power separate device from my Unraid server to do it. Yes, this would still be reliant on the Unraid file server running, but if for whatever reason Plex, the Docker container, went down, I would have a backup Plex solution in order to access my media files. And then that got me wondering, what is it gonna take to add my complete movie library through Plex, through a small device like this? And then, how does that compare to Emby? Let's say hypothetically we have 8,000 to 9,000 test media files. If you're not familiar with test media files, that means they don't exist, they're just test. Anyway, how long would that take to add a complete library? And would I run into any issues doing so? And as a media server being attached via the network, would I run into any issues getting everything set up? To make sure I don't have any network bottlenecks, I'm gonna be setting this up right next to my server, connected directly to the 10 gig switch that powers everything, high speed. Yes, it's only a 1 gig connection to the Simply NUC, but still, just, one less bottleneck. And for kicks, I'm gonna slap a kilowatt meter on this just to see what it idles at and what it uses when it's really crunching the numbers, so to speak. Once I got everything connected, I definitely wanted to make sure that I networked the drive I was trying to use. That's basically pretending to have a physical drive based off a network location. Then I go into Plex, I add the library, I'm gonna name it More Movies, because why not? Browse for the media folder, and when I click on the Z drive, after waiting a little bit, it is unable to load the content. So I could refresh or mess with this if I wanted to, but really I can just type in Z and hit OK or add. Then I definitely, because this is a backup Plex media server and I'm testing to see how long it takes to add, I will need to disable some stuff in the advanced options. These are going to be things like trailers. I can click on prefer local assets. I can disable the extras, and definitely want to disable the thumbnail generation. Then at 12:28 p.m. on 9/21 of 22, I click add. I go through and I refresh the screen, and I'm greeted with More Movies is currently being updated. So everything is working as expected so far. But I do want to go into the task manager. I want to see how the CPU is loading right now, like how much actual usage is being used, and really for the most part in this early stages, it's not very high. However, in later stages, once it's been added some movies, that's when we start to see the CPU get up there in usage. For example, I'm seeing anywhere between 40 to 80%. Now we can see in the dashboard it's showing, wait, that doesn't match up. So this is pretty interesting. In the dashboard, it's saying that it's only using like 3 or 2% of the CPU usage, 5%, 6%, whereas the system usage is being 35%, 40%, 20%. So it's a little weird to see Plex say that the system usage is so high, whereas Plex is only using a small percentage of it. It's almost like the Plex media server isn't recognizing that it's actually using this speed. Not important, going back to the movies, it's currently generating about 739 in about 8 minutes. Now, so far things aren't too interesting. I mean, it's like 60 to 80% as the mighty NUC, as I call it, is adding all these movies. Now, there's obviously going to be a CPU bottleneck here, but I'm not so sure on the networking. Like, it's hard to really tell what's slowing this down, but the key is I'm going to be testing Emby and Plex on the same system. Now going into Emby, setting the similar settings before I pick the drive letter, which, by the way, I picked the drive letter and it did not crash. So it took a little bit, but didn't crash. Now looking at the start bar, I started this at 3:10 p.m. I didn't see any kind of activity initially, just kind of thought maybe it wasn't working. So at 3:11, I refreshed the library. Now I went back and forth on this for, I don't know, about 9 minutes apparently, where the server just didn't seem like it was working. The CPU usage was not high. Network traffic was also not high. Pretty much just overall didn't seem like it was doing anything. And then at 3:20, I decided to refresh the screen and 9,157 items showed up. I should note here that, yeah, it did technically scan the folder and add these, which 9,157 is definitely way off. It should be lower than that, but I was not seeing any poster arts. Part of me wants to call this almost an apples to oranges comparison now. Based off of the results, I kind of sort of have some data that's comparable, but they just loaded completely differently. So let's start out with Plex. 2 hours and 29 minutes to load the 8,600 movies or test files that I introduced all at once. Not too bad, I think, mainly just because it did add them as they went, but it also added the poster arts as it went, for the most part. But then we go over to Emby, and it acted completely different, loading somewhere around the lines of 9,157 test files or movies were identified. Emby loaded these 9,100 files in probably less than 9 minutes. I mean, I refreshed in 9 minutes. But that doesn't mean it didn't already load all the names and inject them into the server faster. I just happened to not refresh it until 9 minutes. But then after that, it just kind of sat there and it loaded the poster arts randomly for, I want to say, at least the next 2.5 to 3 hours. As it sits right now, I can scroll through the Emby server and I'm not seeing a whole lot of poster arts that have not been identified and downloaded. What I can say is this: the previous data set was optimized and kind of loaded already into a Plex server. So technically speaking, Emby kind of had a disadvantage in this test when it comes to loading this same testing Plex database, because it kind of has to rebuild everything from scratch. But still, the posters and the metadata, a lot of that was still downloaded and rebuilt during the introduction process to the server. So I feel like it's still comparable. I halfway kind of expected this video for Emby to just dominate or just be better and be like, haha, just kind of like out of irony. But in reality, how it turns out is that I actually prefer the way Plex loads. With Plex, it at least loads one by one, the screen automatically refreshes, and like, even though it doesn't add them all at once, it just kind of builds it as you go. So you can see it adding it to the library. With Emby, it's just so many files, and then we're gonna periodically load poster arts as we go along for the next 3+ hours. So as far as cleanliness and just the way it did everything, like the way it was executed, I think I actually prefer the Plex way in this test. However, an argument can be said for getting all of the names loaded very quickly within 10 minutes, 9 minutes, and then being able to go through and maybe delete, adjust, or whatever as it's doing things in the background. So my preference might not be the same as yours. In the end though, I did learn that loading a very massive test library does take at least a couple hours, 2.5 hours actually. I know there's definitely some limitations using the Simply NUC just because it's not a super powerful media server like my primary server, but still it's nice to know how long everything takes, or at least what to expect moving forward. And also there's this, the Simply NUC runs at like 15 watts when it's just kind of idling, and when it was at 80%, it was actually at 50 watts in power consumption. So as far as just having a backup Plex media server that's running, idling at very low, power consumption, 15 watts, let's say, and just being there just in case for whatever reason the Docker or something happens with the other Plex build that I can revert to this one, it's kind of nice. Not to mention, since the Simply NUC is running Windows, that is just another Windows machine that I can now put remote desktop software on and possibly have some, other tools to access my network if I ever need to. Well guys, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, make sure to leave those in the comments section down below. As always, thank you for watching, like and subscribe, and have yourself a great day.